Hello and welcome to our New Player Hero Guide series for Flesh and Blood TCG. I am Steelfur Speaks, and I'm doing this series to help new players get into the game by giving them a rating of how accessible, mechanically complex, and how much depth each hero in the game has. This video does not contain deck text. There are lots of other videos, both on my channel and other videos, where you can find deck text, but that is the thing that is most likely to change. Therefore, this video does not tackle that. It does tackle core cards as well as other things about the game. So let's dive in. Betsy is a Guardian hero fighting in the Heavy Hitters Deathmatch Arena, released in January 2024. She is Betsy's skin in the game because she is always trying to get the most out of life. She is trying to wager, she is trying to drink, and she is trying to fight her way until the end of the day where she can't do any more of either of those three things. Then she will sleep, and then she will come back for more tomorrow. What does she say about herself? She says, fame and glory? Bleep that. All I need is winning bets, the taste of blood from the swing of my club, and the top shelf booze to wash it all down. That is her personality, and that is what she encapsulates. So now let's dive in and look at some of the key cards for Betsy and what she herself does as well. So Betsy's skin in the game is a Guardian hero with the 4 intellect, 40 life that is the base plate for most of Flesh and Blood's heroes. Whenever an attack you control wagers, you may pay 2 resources. If you do, that attack gets +1 and overpower, which means it cannot be defended by more than one action card. What's wager, you ask? So let's have a look at her specialization, Bet Big, where you can see she's just put a wager on the table, dropping a ton of gold, breaking the table because the wager is so heavy, and she's ready to go on and fight. 4 cost, 8 attack, 3 block Guardian attaction. Betsy specialization. When this attacks a hero, you may wager a gold, might, and vigor token with them. When this chain link resolves, if this hits, you create a gold, might, and vigor token. Otherwise, they create one of each. So gold, of course, is a token. You pay 2 resources. As an action during your turn, you draw a card with go again. You destroy the token. Might says at the start of your next turn, destroy this token, and get +1 to your next attack. And vigor says at the start of your next turn, destroy this resource and get +1 resource. So destroy this token and get +1 resource. So that means that if this hero hits, you will have both a gold you can use to draw a card whenever you want, and your next turn you will get 1 free resource and +1 on your first attack. But wagers come with a downside. What is wager, you ask? When I attack with a wager card, I announce the wager. So I say, I'm attacking with Bet Big for 8, and I will wager a gold, might, and vigor with you. Then, if the attack hits, so if I deal a single point of physical damage, so if they block for 7 and take 1, for example, or if they block for 8 and I play an attack reaction, then I will create a gold, might, and a vigor token. However, if my opponent successfully blocks all of the damage that I deal, then they will create one of each token. So you can see I'm making a gamble with them that says this is going to hit, and then my opponent has to give me cards to block and decide whether or not it is going to hit. Now, in practice, of course, her ability says overpower, which makes it much harder to defend, so you could easily imagine pitching 2 blue cards, which Guardian has a lot of, having 6 resources, attacking with this, saying, yes, I will give it +1 and overpower, and then my opponent has to come up with a mix of defense reactions, block cards, and armor in order to meet that 9 threshold, because they can only put forward one action card to block from anywhere. And that includes equipment that is actions, like was seen in Evo, Bright Lights, the set previous to Heavy Hitters. The other feature, of course, because 8 power, you might think to yourself, even as a new Fab player, that's quite easy to block. So the other thing that Betsy features, which makes her attacks much harder to block, is auras that buff. So Betsy is also a setup aura-focused deck. So you might play a card like Bigger Than Big or one of the other auras that buff attacks, and you might say, okay, I'll play this for 3 this turn after blocking, so I'll block with 3 cards, take very little damage, and then I'll spend a blue and this card to put this on the table. And then next turn, at the start of my turn, I will destroy it, and my next Guardian attack will get +5, and when this attacks, I may wager a might token. Now, this lets me add a wager to any attack, including those with a powerful on-hit effect, that do not previously have a wager on. Some of the best attacks in the game can be made into wager attacks and then used with Betsy's ability to gain overpower and guarantee a hit. If you're a new player looking at what sort of examples this might be, think about something like Command and Conquer, which you can Google, and that will give you an idea of the sort of on-hit effects that people will be trying to push through with Bigger Than Big. So you're going to do some setup turns where you're going to play auras. Other times you're just going to be putting out very good value attacks, and then based on your opponent's posture, trying to decide whether you want to wager. If your opponent, for example, has what looks like a setup turn where they've arsenaled and they've kept a full hand, then you might say to yourself, actually now's when I want to wager, because if I force them to block, then I take the fangs out of their next attack. So for that reason, playing Betsy will reward players who have developed the ability to read new players. Mechanically, we'll break Betsy down. She obviously has that focus on auras and buffs, which I think is a bit more difficult for new players, so that kind of reduces her score a little bit. She has powerful attacks, but some of them only block for 2, which does also reduce her mechanical score a little bit. It reduces the amount of choices that new players can make between attacking and blocking, because Betsy does have to play 2 block attacks, and that, of course, does reduce her flexibility compared to what we've seen with other heroes. But what brings her score back up is that she does have that balance of powerful attacks and also a large defensive suite of reactions from the existing Guardian. So if she needs to build her deck defensively and play a slower game, she can. So she has the ability to flex out beyond her auras and buffs into a more defensive style, which increases her mechanical flexibility and increases her mechanic score. Wager as well doesn't really raise her score for a new player. I think Wager is a more complex ability on the face of it, even though mechanically it's quite straightforward. So I would say that Wager doesn't really raise or reduce her score. It's easy to understand but hard to master, which means for new players it's not necessarily the best thing to be doing straight away. Accessibility then. Triggering Wager, in my mind, as I've already kind of hinted in this video, is a complex decision. You need to have an understanding of whether your opponent is likely to block, how much armor do they have left, how much posturing are they doing to have a big turn, how likely is it your attack is going to hit. You also need to understand what the impact of you giving them the tokens that you're wagering is. So for example, your opponent might never need a Vigor token. They might be flooded with resources. Therefore, if you wager a Vigor token with them, they're not liable to block it out because they don't care if they get a Vigor token. Whereas if they need Vigor tokens and they're running very resource light, then you've given them a reason to block, and that Vigor token is then giving them the capabilities to do a bigger turn than they were able to previously. So triggering Wager is quite a complex ability. It's the same with gold. If you wager a gold, which Betsy does use to turn on quite a lot of her abilities and some other effects, and you're playing against a Kasai or a Victor, you might not want to give that hero gold. So there's a lot of complexity that goes into when to trigger Wager and evaluating whether or not you put the wager on or what the impact on your opponent is that might lead them to block, which is a layer of complexity that reduces her score quite heavily, I would say. Her powerful attacks not having as many defensive options and having lower block also reduces her accessibility. As we've said before, like accessibility from blocking is the effect that by blocking well, your hero gives you more life, which gives you more turns to make the right plays. So being able to block well is a very accessible feature for new heroes, and heroes that don't block as well don't necessarily get a higher score on that rating. Aura setup turns are also difficult. You have to both decide how much damage an aura is worth to take, because you'll have to pay 3 to set up an aura. You also then, of course, are telegraphing your decision to make a big turn and a big swing on the next turn to your opponent, which can be countered. And there is also just the feeling that maybe it doesn't feel as rewarding to a new player to play an aura rather than playing a big attack, right? Especially if it does get countered. Like if you play an aura and then your opponent says, wow, thanks, okay, here's 10 attacks and you have to block all of them and your aura goes to waste. That is a very feels bad feeling for new players, and it's also an easy trap to walk into. So new players will struggle with that, which is why I feel like she gets quite a low accessibility score. Depth, however, she gets 5 stars. Wager, as I've said, I view it as quite complex, which means that it has deep possibilities for playing both around your opponent and also knowing when the effects are better for you or for them and all those other things. That means that depth on this hero is quite big. Also knowing when to set up versus pressure your opponent is an advanced skill. So knowing when you have breathing room to play an aura versus needing to attack your opponent and take cards out of their hand, I feel like Betsy has a very high potential ceiling for skilled players. And I feel like, you know, if you're really vibing on her aesthetic, then there is a reason to get into Betsy, because learning how to play Wager effectively, learning when to set up, learning how to block with less block values in your deck will make you a better player in the long run. So, you know, if you're vibing on Betsy, there's no reason not to dive into her as a new player. But I will say that from a core mechanical standpoint and an accessibility standpoint, you will find yourself making the wrong decisions, like, fairly often, and that will be frustrating in the outset. So just bear that in mind. So moving on then, we can give Betsy a new player score of 3 stars. Although she has a very, very high depth score, I feel like her mechanics are not as attractive as other heroes could be. They are more complex. It does take more time to get your head around them. And I think the addition of Wager means that she isn't as accessible as she could be. So I would say for new players, I wouldn't necessarily recommend her as your first choice. You know, she's not 5 out of 5 stars, but 3 stars doesn't mean she isn't a hero that you will have the ability to pick up. So if you are very, very much vibing with the Betsy aesthetic, then you should probably look into and agree and just think about playing the hero. I also will say that when I say, you know, no one can pick up any hero in Flesh and Blood can be picked up, none of them are super dense, but there are heroes that, you know, will be easier for new players to get into, and when they learn them, they will end up with a better understanding of the core mechanics. And I feel like Betsy is one of those heroes where if you learn her, you will end up with a good understanding of the core mechanics, but I think it will be a bit difficult to get into her at the start. As always, if you've enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe to the channel. I have a whole playlist dedicated to these new player hero guide videos, and if there is a hero that isn't in that playlist, they will be soon. Obviously, it takes a while to work through all the backlog on here and make sure they're all kept updated, so I might have taken the video down while I made some changes. There are also heroes that are living legend or not playable in every format of the game that I have not done new player hero guides on. I believe truly in just doing guides on the big heroes that are playable in every format of the game, because at a baseline, I think the players, the heroes that are most accessible for the new players are the ones that let them use their card pool in as many formats as possible. So you won't see a deck tech for Blitz-only heroes or UPF-only heroes or those kind of things on my channel, or even new player hero guides for them, because these are the main heroes in the game that can be played in both Blitz and CC, the 2 main formats of the game, and therefore those are the most relevant. As always, thank you all for listening. If you have any questions that were not answered by this video, please do drop them in the comments section below. If there is a hero you would really like to see that I do not have a new player hero guide on, let me know. There are also a lot of other outdated resources in the playlist as well. They are useful for people who want to dig in a bit deeper to things that aren't covered in as much depth. You know, there is an overview that looks at every hero circa 2021 that talks about all the different ones. You might watch that as a historical viewpoint and see some of the heroes that are no longer legal in the game compared to how they are now, or you might just look at these videos that cover each hero individually. Thanks a lot for listening. Speak to you all soon.